On September 23, 2025, the world mourned the passing of Claudia Cardinale, remembered as the last great siren of European cinema, a muse to Fellini, a symbol of strength and glamour. The tributes were beautiful, but they only told half the story. The other half was locked away, waiting. In the days following her passing, a letter she had written years earlier was delivered to the man the world once knew as her brother. That letter was the final piece of a puzzle that redefined her entire legacy. It was the last chapter in a life built on a foundation of secrets, survival, and a quiet, lifelong battle to reclaim the truth. To understand the woman she truly was, we must go back to the secret that started it all. Kidnapped and harmed at 19, then a secret baby cover-up. To truly comprehend the steel in Claudia Cardinale's soul, one must begin in the place where her innocence was lost and her resilience was forged. We must travel back to Tunis in the late 1950s. Long before she was a global icon, she was Claude Josephine Rose Cardinale, a beautiful but headstrong young woman growing up in the sun-drenched French protectorate of Tunisia. In 1957, at just 19, she reluctantly entered and won a beauty contest crowning the most beautiful Italian girl in Tunisia. The grand prize was a trip to the prestigious Venice Film Festival. This trip was a spark, an unexpected glimpse into a world of art and celebrity that seemed a universe away. It thrust her, however briefly, into the Italian film industry's orbit and set her on an unforeseen collision course with fame. But before that fame could offer any protection, her life took a dark and violent turn back in Tunis. In an event that would forever alter the course of her existence, she was abducted by a man and subjected to a horrific violation. It was a brutal act of violence that left her feeling shattered and adrift in a sea of confusion and shame. The trauma of this unforgivable trespass was compounded weeks later by a discovery that sent a wave of cold terror through her. She was pregnant. In the rigidly conservative Catholic society of the 1950s, for a young, unmarried woman to be expecting a child was a life-destroying scandal. It meant social ostracism, familial disgrace, and the immediate end of any respectable future, let alone a budding film career. Cardinale was plunged into a state of profound despair. She felt utterly trapped, terrified, and saw no viable path forward. In her remarkably candid autobiography, My Stars, she confessed that she was pushed to such a dark place that she considered giving up on life altogether, feeling that her story was over before it had even begun. This was not a professional dilemma. It was an existential crisis. Her body, her future, her very identity had been stolen and rewritten by the monstrous act of a stranger. It was at this absolute nadir, her lowest and most vulnerable point, that a powerful figure strode into her life, a man who would become her protector, her promoter, her Svengali, and ultimately her jailer. Producer Franco Cristaldi, a major player in the Italian film world, Cristaldi saw the immense, raw potential in Cardinale's expressive eyes and defiant beauty. He also saw her desperate situation. He devised an audacious, almost unbelievably elaborate plan to manage her problem, and in doing so, to bind her inextricably to him. He announced to the world that his promising new discovery was being sent to London for an extended period to learn English. It was a perfect cover story. In reality, he was sequestering her away to give birth in complete secrecy. In 1958, in a quiet London clinic, she delivered a baby boy. She named him Patrick. The ordeal of the birth, however, was merely the prelude to an even more psychologically grueling performance. Cristaldi, a master manipulator of image and reality, concocted the most painful part of the ruse. Patrick would be raised by Claudia's parents and presented to the world as her youngest brother. For the next 7 years, Claudia Cardinale lived this impossible, soul-crushing lie. While her star ascended in the heavens of Italian cinema, she would return from the glamorous sets of Rome to her family home, where her own son would run to her, calling her Claudia. She had to mother him from a distance, channeling her fierce, primal love into the socially acceptable affection of a doting older sister. Imagine the sheer psychological torture of this daily reality. To hold your child, but be forbidden from calling yourself his mother. To feel the burning, unconditional love of a parent, but have to perform the role of a sibling. To watch his first steps and hear his first words, all while living in constant, gnawing fear of exposure. The world saw a carefree, enchanting new star, but in private, she was a young mother grieving a loss that was standing, breathing, and growing right in front of her. This foundational trauma, this profound and defining secret, would become the dark, gravitational core around which the glittering myth of La Cardinale was built. This secret was the foundation of her prison. With her life now compromised, she was forced into her next impossible performance, not only to become a movie star, but to do so while hiding the physical evidence of the very secret that gave her protector his power. Pregnancy panic on set, hiding a baby bump, till month 7. The secret birth of her son was only the first act of an incredibly perilous real-life drama. The second act was arguably even more audacious, concealing the pregnancy itself while simultaneously launching a major film career. Franco Cristaldi was a businessman above all else. He had invested in a promising new talent, and he was not about to let her condition derail his plans. The show, he decreed, must go on. And so, while reeling from her personal ordeal and grappling with the mounting terror of her unplanned pregnancy, Claudia was thrust onto bustling film sets. During this incredibly fraught period, she made several films that would become instrumental to her early success, including the French-Tunisian production Goha, 1958, and, most notably, Mario Monicelli's smash hit comedy Big Deal on Madonna Street, 1958. This film, a masterpiece of the commedia all'italiana genre, was her launching pad to stardom in Italy. All the while, she was hiding a growing baby bump from her co-stars, the crew, and the ever-present cameras. This was a masterclass in cinematic deception, orchestrated with military precision by Cristaldi and the loyal production teams he controlled. The methods were physically and emotionally taxing. Her belly was strapped down with tight corsets and bindings, a physically painful process that served as a constant, suffocating reminder of the secret she was carrying beneath the layers of fabric. Wardrobe departments became her co-conspirators, designing costumes with clever draping, empire waists, or providing her with an arsenal of props, a large handbag, a strategically held book, a flowing scarf, to obscure her changing figure from view. Directors who were in on the secret employed specific camera angles, framing her in tight close-ups that focused on her expressive face, or positioning her behind furniture to keep her torso out of the shot. This experience bore no resemblance to a joyful, expectant motherhood. It was a 9-month period of unrelenting panic and psychological anguish. She continued to work on set right up until she was nearly 7 months pregnant. Every single day was a battle fought on 2 fronts, one against the natural changes in her own body, and the other against the deep, gnawing anxiety that the secret would be discovered. The morning sickness, the profound fatigue, the emotional roller coaster of her condition, all had to be violently suppressed the moment the director called azione. She had to conjure smiles, project flirtatious energy, and embody the very essence of youthful desirability, all while her entire world was collapsing inward. She later described this time as the most profoundly difficult of her life, a period where the dark thoughts of ending her suffering returned with a terrifying intensity. She was completely, utterly isolated. She couldn't confide in her co-stars, not even the great Marcello Mastroianni on the set of Big Deal. Only Cristaldi and a tiny, trusted inner circle knew the truth. He was the puppet master controlling the narrative, and she was the lead actress in his most important production, her own life. The high-stakes magic trick of hiding her pregnancy from the world was a resounding success, but it came at an immense personal cost. deepening the psychological wounds that would take a lifetime to heal. It cemented the pattern of endurance that would define her entire career. The extraordinary ability to project luminous glamour and unshakable strength while privately weathering the most unimaginable of storms. She had survived the ordeal and successfully hidden the secret, but in doing so, she had proven to Cristaldi just how much she could endure and how dependent she was on him. He now had the ultimate leverage, and he would use it to build the perfect gilded cage around her. The producer who owned her life, literally. Franco Cristaldi's role in Claudia Cardinale's life is one of the most complex, disturbing, and illustrative Svengali stories in the annals of cinema. He was not merely her producer or manager. He was her architect. He discovered her raw talent, protected her from a career-ending revelation, and then masterfully exploited that protection to control her for the better part of 2 decades. After successfully orchestrating the intricate cover-up of Patrick's birth, Cristaldi presented the young and vulnerable Cardinale with a contract, a document that, in essence, made her his personal property. This was no ordinary studio agreement. It was a draconian 18-year pact that dictated every facet of her existence, both public and private. He didn't just manage her career, he micromanaged her very being. The terms were astonishingly, suffocatingly restrictive. She was forbidden from cutting her famously thick, dark hair without his express, written permission. She was not allowed to gain a single kilogram of weight. With her diet and exercise regimen closely monitored, he curated her social life, telling her who she could and could not befriend. And most critically, the contract contained a clause that forbade her from marrying anyone or forming any public romantic attachment that might tarnish the carefully constructed fantasy of the available, desirable ingenue he was selling to the public. Her life was a meticulously curated performance, and he was the sole, unassailable director. He was the absolute gatekeeper to her finances, her scripts, and her public image. More terrifyingly, he was also the gatekeeper to her son. His protection of her secret was a double-edged sword of the cruelest design. While he successfully shielded her from a scandal that would have destroyed her, he also wielded that secret as a psychological weapon, a constant, unspoken reminder of how much she owed him and how easily he could ruin everything for her. It was a classic, insidious manipulation tactic. Create a crisis, position yourself as the sole solution, and then leverage the resulting dependency for total, unequivocal control. So, was it a mentorship or a gilded cage? It was, without question, a gilded cage of the most exquisite and painful construction. On the surface, she was a reigning queen of Italian cinema, living in beautiful homes, wearing haute couture, and being celebrated by millions. But in reality, she was a prisoner. She possessed no meaningful autonomy. Every significant decision, from which film to accept to which party to attend, was made for her. Her very identity was shaped by his commercial instincts, and her own child was the ultimate leverage he held over her. Cristaldi's control was absolute, a suffocating reality that stood in the starkest possible contrast to the free-spirited, fiercely independent women she so often and so convincingly portrayed on screen. For 18 long years, Claudia Cardinale wasn't just playing a role in the movies. Her entire life was a role, written, produced, and directed by Franco Cristaldi. With her career, her image, and her finances under his complete control, Cristaldi would soon make a move to claim the one part of her life that remained her own, her legal status as a single woman. His next act would be the most surreal public performance of all. A fake wedding that wasn't fake enough. By 1967, Claudia Cardinale's star was at its zenith. She was a globally recognized actress, working with the best directors in both Europe and America. Franco Cristaldi's professional pride in her success was matched only by his personal obsession with controlling her. Their relationship had long existed in a strange, ill-defined gray area, part professional, part paternal, wholly possessive. He was determined to solidify his claim on her, to formalize their bizarre arrangement in a way that would be recognized, at least somewhere in the world. During a promotional tour in the United States for the film Don't Make Waves, a frothy comedy co-starring Tony Curtis and Sharon Tate, he staged one of the most surreal and coercive events of her life, a surprise wedding. They were in Atlanta, Georgia, a city far from the familiar landscapes of Rome and Paris. It was there that Cristaldi, without any prior discussion or romantic prelude, informed her that they were getting married that day. It wasn't a proposal, it was a decree. For Cardinale, who had spent a decade yearning for a genuine emotional connection and a life of her own, this was a waking nightmare. She was still bound by the ironclad contract, but more importantly, she was still bound by the secret of her son, Patrick. Cristaldi's ultimate leverage was, and always would be, Patrick. He made it chillingly clear that if she refused to go through with the ceremony, he could make her life and her access to her son incredibly difficult, if not impossible. Fearing that he could use his immense power to challenge her custody or cut her off from her child entirely, she felt the cold steel of a trap closing around her. She had no choice but to comply. The ceremony itself was a bizarre, almost farcical affair, if it weren't so deeply manipulative. It was a shotgun-style event, rushed and impersonal, held in a sterile office, and devoid of any genuine emotion or celebration. She went through the motions in a daze, feeling trapped, powerless, and utterly alone. While the marriage was legally recognized under the laws of the state of Georgia, it held a different status back home. In Italy, where divorce was still illegal and the laws governing marriage were far more stringent and tied to the Catholic Church, the union was never registered or acknowledged as official. It was, in essence, a legally binding performance piece, staged not for family or friends, but for an audience of one. Cristaldi himself, who now had a piece of paper that proved his ownership. Their marriage was as dramatic and hollow as the worst kind of Hollywood fiction. It did not magically transform their dynamic into one of partnership or love. It only formalized his control under a socially acceptable veneer. For Cardinale, it was another bar on the cage, another public role she was forced to play. The union was, predictably, tumultuous and unhappy, marked by Cristaldi's unceasing possessiveness and her own growing, desperate yearning for freedom. The paperwork might have been filed in a Georgia courthouse, but in her heart and in the eyes of her own country, the marriage was a sham, a desperate act of self-preservation to protect her relationship with the most important person in her life, her son. Now legally bound to her controller, in the eyes of the world, Cardinale's cage was complete. But it was in this moment of total confinement that the first glimmers of her quiet rebellion began to show, starting with her resolute refusal to be possessed by anyone else. Turning down Marcello Mastroianni's real-life seduction. In the glittering firmament of 1960s Italian cinema, there was no star that burned brighter than Marcello Mastroianni. He was the undisputed king, the epitome of a new kind of European male charisma, handsome but approachable, charming but with a hint of melancholy, the favorite leading man of the great Federico Fellini. When he and the rapidly ascending Claudia Cardinale were cast opposite each other in Mauro Bolognini's piercing drama Il Bel Antonio, 1960, the on-screen chemistry was electric. But for Mastroianni, the feelings didn't stop when the director yelled, "Taglia." During the production, Mastroianni fell completely and utterly for Cardinale. He pursued her with a genuine, heartfelt passion, confessing that he was deeply in love with her. This wasn't the casual, predatory flirtation common on film sets. By all accounts, including his own in later years, he was genuinely smitten, captivated by her beauty, her intelligence, and the mysterious, guarded quality that seemed to surround her. For almost any other woman in the world, the sincere attentions of Marcello Mastroianni would have been the stuff of dreams. But Cardinale's life, as we know, was far from a dream. It was a carefully managed existence under the ever-watchful eye of Franco Cristaldi, and her emotional world was a fortress, built brick by brick to protect her from further pain and complication. Her response to Mastroianni's passionate advances has become the stuff of legend, a perfect encapsulation of her unique blend of humor, grace, and steely resolve. She famously and repeatedly laughed off his declarations of love, dismissing them with a wave of her hand as method acting gone wild. she played it cool, treating his heartfelt advances as if they were merely part of his process, his on-screen character bleeding into his real-life performance. She masterfully shut him down, firmly but without cruelty, leaving the great Mastroianni completely and utterly friend-zoned. Years later, he would insist in interviews that his feelings had been entirely real, that he had been desperately in love with her and was heartbroken by her refusal. So why did she say no? It was a decision born of a complex web of factors. A primary reason was undoubtedly the suffocating control of Cristaldi, who would never have permitted such a high-profile, unsanctioned affair to blossom. But on a deeper, more personal level, it was likely an act of profound self-preservation. After the foundational trauma she had endured, and living within the confines of her gilded cage, opening herself up to a real, vulnerable romance was a risk she was perhaps unwilling or psychologically unable to take. She had seen how powerful men could exert their will. Mastroianni, however sincere, was another powerful man. Her rejection of him wasn't just a celebrity anecdote. It was a quiet but powerful act of defiance and control in a life where she was afforded so very little of either. She had successfully defended her personal boundaries from even the most charming man in Italy. But her next battle would be for control of her public image, against a folk rock icon who used her face without asking, proving that threats to her autonomy could come from anywhere. Bob Dylan's album cover that almost ruined her. By the mid-1960s, Claudia Cardinale was not just an Italian star. She was a global symbol of allure, and her image was ubiquitous. It appeared in magazines, movie posters, and advertisements around the world. But in 1966, her portrait appeared in a place that was both culturally iconic and completely unauthorized, leading to a fascinating clash between a cinematic goddess and a folk rock deity. The venue was the gatefold sleeve of Bob Dylan's sprawling, revolutionary double album, Blonde on Blonde, a universally acknowledged landmark of 20th century music. When the first pressings of this highly anticipated album were released, fans who eagerly opened the gatefold sleeve were greeted with a cryptic collage of 9 photographs. One of them, placed prominently, was a sultry, stunning portrait of Claudia Cardinale. There was no caption, no explanation for her presence. She was simply there, a mysterious, glamorous muse, alongside images of Dylan himself and other abstract figures. Dylan's devoted fans were intrigued, speculating about the connection. But Cardinale, upon learning of it, was absolutely furious. In a move that seems almost unthinkable today, no one from Bob Dylan's team or his label, Columbia Records, had bothered to ask for her permission, or the permission of her powerful management to use the photograph. In an era before image rights were the fiercely protected commodity they are today, this was still a major and arrogant overstep. For Cardinale, this was yet another infuriating instance of her image being used and commodified without her consent. Another stark example of her ongoing struggle for control over her own persona. While Franco Cristaldi micromanaged her professional life down to the last detail, this was a rogue act from an entirely different universe, and it represented a line she was unwilling to let anyone cross. She and her formidable legal team immediately took action. The result of her complaint was swift and decisive. Columbia Records was forced to halt production and remove the photograph from all subsequent pressings of Blonde on Blonde. This action had an unintended consequence. It turned the original version of the album sleeve, with Cardinale's picture intact, into an instant, high-priced collector's item for record aficionados. The story remains a fascinating footnote in the careers of 2 monumental cultural figures. More importantly, it speaks volumes about Cardinale's fierce determination to protect the one thing she was constantly fighting for, the rights to her own image. While she may have been a muse to the great auteurs of cinema, she had no intention of becoming an accidental, unpaid, and uncredited pin-up for a folk icon, no matter how influential he was. This fight for control over her public image was a constant battle, but a far more insidious threat lurked on her own film sets, where the men she worked with created nightmares that reopened her oldest wounds. Creepy co-star advances and set nightmares. The celluloid glamour of the silver screen often conceals a much darker underbelly of misconduct, a world where power dynamics are frequently exploited and boundaries are routinely crossed. Even an icon of Claudia Cardinale's stature was not immune to this pervasive reality. The film set, which the public imagines as a magical space of creativity, can be a place of profound discomfort and anxiety for performers, especially women. One of her most trying and emotionally taxing experiences came during the filming of the 1964 Italian comedy The Magnificent Cuckold, Il Magnifico Cornuto. On this particular set, she found herself facing inappropriate behavior from two fronts, creating a pincer movement of unease. The director, Antonio Pietrangeli, reportedly ignored her professional and personal boundaries, fostering an environment where she felt disrespected. But the more distressing and persistent behavior came from her celebrated co-star, the famous Italian actor Ugo Tognazzi. According to her accounts, Tognazzi made continuous and unwanted romantic overtures toward her, creating a toxic and deeply uncomfortable working environment. His actions were not the charming flirtations of a colleague. They were a violation, the actions of a man in a position of power who felt entitled to the attention of his female co-star. For any woman, this kind of on-set harassment would be stressful, exhausting, and infuriating. But for Claudia Cardinale, it was something far worse. It was a psychological trigger of the highest order. This relentless campaign of unwanted attention dredged up the deepest and most painful memories of her life. The terrifying ordeal she had survived in Tunis years earlier. Tognazzi's improper pursuit was a horrific echo of her past trauma, reawakening feelings of powerlessness, dread, and the desperate need to escape that she constantly fought to keep buried deep within her. This is the hidden, ugly reality of being labeled a symbol of allure. Men on set, from crew members to co-stars, often felt a sense of ownership, a perceived right to an actress's body, and attention that mirrored the way audiences consumed her image on screen. But Cardinale, ever the survivor, did not let it break her or compromise her work. She summoned her reserves of inner strength and powered through the production with the same steely, unwavering professionalism that became her armor and her trademark. She completed the film, delivering a polished performance despite the turmoil raging just off camera. This experience, however, served as a stark and painful reminder that even at the height of her international fame, the world of filmmaking was still a perilous place, and the ghosts of her past were never truly far away. She had learned to survive the psychological pressures of her own industry. Her next great challenge would test her resilience against a force of pure chaos in one of the most famously difficult film productions in history. Taming the madman Klaus Kinski in the jungle. By 1982, Claudia Cardinale was a revered veteran of world cinema. She had collaborated with the Mount Rushmore of European directors and shared the screen with acting legends, but nothing in her extensive and storied career could have prepared her for the sheer, elemental, soul-testing chaos of making Werner Herzog's mad masterpiece, Fitzcarraldo. The film's production is the stuff of cinematic legend, a chronicle of near-biblical disasters, shooting in the remote, unforgiving Peruvian jungle. The physically impossible task of hauling a 320-ton steamship over a mountain without special effects. And at the very heart of this maelstrom, the volcanic, unhinged, and terrifying presence of its leading man, Klaus Kinski. Kinski was more than just a difficult actor. He was a human hurricane, a man notorious for his terrifying and violent temper tantrums that terrorized casts and crews for his entire career. He screamed obscenities at his visionary director, Werner Herzog, engaged in physical altercations with extras, and was so profoundly hated by the local indigenous crew that one of the chiefs, in all seriousness, reportedly approached Herzog and offered to permanently remove the troublesome actor for him. Into this crucible of madness walked Claudia Cardinale, cast in the crucial role of Molly, the elegant, pragmatic, and loving brothel madam who funds Fitzcarraldo's impossible dream. On a set where everyone else was at their wits' end, walking on eggshells around the human landmine that was Kinski, something truly remarkable happened. Cardinale did not just manage him, she seemed to utterly neutralize him. In their scenes together, the raging madman transformed. He became focused, professional, disciplined, and by all accounts, a perfect gentleman. Their shared moments on screen are an oasis of calm and genuine warmth in a film that otherwise crackles with a raw, manic energy. Her presence had a uniquely tranquilizing, almost mystical effect on him. Even the unflappable Werner Herzog, a man who stared down chaos his entire career, was completely baffled by this phenomenon. He couldn't comprehend how this poised, elegant, and soft-spoken woman could so effortlessly defang the most notoriously volatile actor he had ever known. Cardinale's method, when she spoke of it later, was deceptively simple. She refused to engage with his insanity. She did not cower, but she did not challenge him either. She treated him with an unwavering professional respect, a cool grace, and a firm but gentle demeanor that gave his towering ego and his explosive rage nothing to latch onto. She met his chaos with an unshakable, profound calm. Her ability to tame Klaus Kinski is perhaps the ultimate, most telling testament to her incredible inner strength and quiet power. In the heart of the Amazon, surrounded by literal and figurative madness, Claudia Cardinale proved, without ever raising her voice, that she was the most formidable force on set. Having survived the ultimate trial by fire, Cardinale had proven her strength to the world, and more importantly, to herself. The quiet rebellion was over. The time for open liberation had arrived. Her next act would not be one of survival, but of triumph. Her 42-year love affair, born on a mafia movie set. After nearly 2 decades of living in a gilded cage, Claudia Cardinale finally summoned the immense courage to break free. In the early 1970s, in a move that shocked the Italian film industry, she left Franco Cristaldi, ending both their suffocating professional relationship and their hollow, sham marital arrangement. Her liberation, both as a woman and as an artist, became fully realized in 1974 on the set of a gritty, violent, and passionate mob film called I Guapi, also known as Blood Brothers. The director of that film was Pasquale Squitieri, a fiery, brilliant, and fiercely political Neapolitan filmmaker. On that tumultuous set, amid choreographed brawls and dramatic monologues, an authentic and powerful connection was forged. Squitieri was the absolute antithesis of Cristaldi. He was her creative partner, not her controller. He saw her not as a beautiful object to be molded and sold, but as an equal, a fellow artist with a sharp mind and deep instincts, someone to collaborate with, to argue with, and to create with. They fell deeply and passionately in love, embarking on a tempestuous, vibrant, and deeply committed relationship that would last for the rest of his life. This was the grand, all-encompassing love story she had been denied for so long, a partnership she actively chose for herself, free from coercion or contract. In 1979, they welcomed a daughter, whom they also named Claudia. The birth of her daughter was a profoundly healing and joyful experience, one that stood in the starkest possible contrast to the secrecy, fear, and shame that had shrouded the birth of her first child so many years before. With Squitieri, she was finally able to build the open, loving, and authentic family life she had always craved, entirely on her own terms. They became one of Italy's most fascinating and enduring power couples, collaborating on numerous films that were as intense and political as their relationship, blurring the lines between their art and their romance. Their partnership was a real-life, long-running epic, lasting an incredible 42 years until Squitieri's life's journey concluded in 2017. He was the man who not only loved her, but crucially liberated her, allowing her to finally be her full, complicated, and brilliant self, both on and off the screen. Her love affair with Pasquale Squitieri wasn't just a romance, it was the triumphant, powerful third act of her life, a beautiful testament to her to find true love and profound freedom after enduring decades of suffocating control. This new, authentic life was hers. but she still carried the physical markers of her long rebellion and the immense pressures she had endured, including a very visible and audible daily habit. 2 packs a day. The glamour girl's dirty habit. Behind every immaculately airbrushed publicity photograph, every elegantly poised red carpet appearance, and every glamorous on-screen moment, there was, for decades, a nearly constant cloud of smoke. Claudia Cardinale had a habit that clashed hilariously and profoundly with her carefully polished image as a pristine screen siren. She was a heavy, unapologetic, and dedicated chain smoker. This wasn't a case of a few social cigarettes at a party. For the majority of her adult life, she smoked a staggering 2 packs a day. This habit was, in many ways, an integral and inseparable part of her public and private persona. It was, most famously, the source of her signature husky, gravelly voice. That seductive, slightly world-weary, and utterly unique tone that became one of her most recognizable trademarks wasn't just a gift of genetics. It was a texture curated over decades by countless cigarettes. In a strange way, the habit added to her multifaceted allure, undercutting the perfect, almost intimidating beauty with a hint of rebellious, devil-may-care energy. It suggested a woman who lived life on her own terms, who wasn't overly concerned with perfection, and who wasn't afraid of a little earthly vice. The image of the eternally glamorous ingenue, dressed in Dior, puffing away like a character in a French New Wave film, is a delightful and telling contradiction. It humanizes her, grounding the ethereal movie star in a very real, very gritty habit. Was it a coping mechanism for the immense, unrelenting pressures of her life and the heavy weight of the secrets she was forced to keep? Almost certainly. It was a small, private act of rebellion, a daily ritual that was entirely her own, in a life that was for so long controlled and choreographed by others. While she maintained the habit for the better part of her life, there is a poignant and admirable postscript to this story. In her final year, after a lifetime wreathed in smoke, she finally managed to kick the habit for good. The symbol of allure, with a rebel's lung capacity, ultimately chose to take final, decisive control of her well-being. A last powerful act of self-care for a woman who had spent a lifetime enduring. Ironically, the very voice that her habit helped create was the same voice the industry had tried to erase, marking one of the most important turning points in her battle for her identity. Dubbing drama. Her voice was too hoarse for Italy. For modern audiences, Claudia Cardinale's husky, distinctive, and unforgettable voice is as essential to her persona as her captivating eyes or her radiant smile. But for a significant and frustrating portion of her early career, the Italian public, her primary audience, never actually heard it. In the golden age of Italian cinema, at the famed Cinecittà studios, it was standard industry practice to shoot films without recording live sound. All the dialogue, sound effects, and music were added in post-production. This process, known as dubbing or post-synchronization, allowed for greater flexibility on set and made it easy to create international versions of films, but it also meant that an actor's own voice wasn't always considered essential or even desirable. In Cardinale's case, the powerful studio executives deemed her natural voice a problem that needed to be fixed. Having been born and raised in French-speaking Tunisia, her Italian, though fluent, was tinged with a heavy and unmistakable French accent. Furthermore, her naturally low, gravelly vocal tone, the very quality we find so seductive and authentic today, was considered too hoarse and not sufficiently feminine for the youthful, ingenue roles she was playing. It didn't fit the polished, melodic, and conventionally pretty ideal of a leading lady's voice at the time. As a result, in all of her early Italian films, her lines were dubbed over by a professional voice actress with a smoother, more acceptable voice. She was a silent image on screen, her true voice silenced and replaced by studio mandate. This was yet another insidious way her identity was controlled, reshaped, and sanitized by others. She was a star who was seen but not truly heard. The monumental turning point came in 1963 with the maestro himself, the legendary Federico Fellini, when he cast her in his surrealist masterpiece, 8½. Fellini was an artist who cherished authenticity above all else. He understood the power of unique, idiosyncratic details. He adored her voice, finding its unique, smoky texture and its charming accent to be absolutely essential to her character, Carla, and to her real-life persona, which fascinated him. He fought the studio producers and vehemently insisted that for the first time in a major Italian film, the world would hear the real Claudia. The impact was revolutionary. Hearing her own raw, real voice emerge from her image on the screen was a profound moment of liberation for her and a revelation for audiences. Her voice, once deemed a flaw to be corrected, was suddenly celebrated as a signature. It was the sound of a real woman, not a manufactured ideal. Federico Fellini didn't just give her one of the greatest roles of her career. In a very real sense, he gave her back her voice. Finding her voice with Fellini was a pivotal victory. It empowered her to make the ultimate decision about her career and her artistic soul, a choice between the machine of Hollywood and the freedom of Europe. Snubbing Hollywood stardom to avoid the Lauren trap. In the 1960s, a major Hollywood contract was the undisputed holy grail for any ambitious European actor. It was the golden ticket, a promise of global fame, unimaginable wealth, and a permanent place in the cinematic pantheon. After her crossover success in international hits like Blake Edwards' The Pink Panther, 1963, Hollywood came calling for Claudia Cardinale in a big way. Universal Studios, one of the major players, offered her a lucrative multi-picture deal designed to make her their next great international star. It was the dream that thousands of actors prayed for. She took one long look at the glittering opportunity, and she bolted in the other direction. In a move that stunned many in the industry, Cardinale made a conscious, deliberate, and career-defining decision to turn her back on the allure of mainstream Hollywood stardom. Why would she reject such a prize? In her own words, she feared falling into what she cannily termed the Lauren trap. Her great contemporary and perceived rival, Sophia Loren, had brilliantly conquered Hollywood, becoming a true international superstar and an Oscar winner. But in Cardinale's astute view, that victory had come at a significant artistic cost. She felt that the Hollywood machine had taken the earthy, explosive, and brilliant Neapolitan actress and over-glamorized her, frequently typecasting her in roles that prioritized her bombshell physique over her immense, nuanced talent. She saw Hollywood as a factory that sanded down the interesting, unique, and culturally specific edges of foreign actors to make them more generic and palatable for American audiences. Claudia Cardinale refused to be homogenized. She had spent the entire first half of her career under the total, suffocating control of one man. She had no intention of spending the second half under the control of a powerful studio system an ocean away. She made the courageous choice to remain based in Europe, where she could continue to work with visionary auteurs like Fellini, Visconti, Leone, and many others. She prioritized artistic freedom and challenging roles over commercial fame and a Beverly Hills mansion. It was a bold move that likely cost her the kind of ubiquitous household name recognition in America that Lauren and others achieved, but it saved her artistic soul. It was the ultimate power move from a woman who had learned, through bitter experience, what it meant to lose control of her own life and her own narrative. By snubbing Hollywood, Claudia Cardinale wasn't just making a career choice. She was making a statement. She proved that she was the original boss babe, an artist who would rather be the queen of her own rich, complex, and sometimes difficult cinematic world than just another beautiful, interchangeable jewel in Hollywood's polished crown. So we return to the paradox. How did the woman whose voice was deemed unacceptable become one of cinema's most powerful presences? The answer is now clear. Her power was forged in the silence. It was born in the secrets she was forced to keep, in the quiet resolve she needed to survive a predator, a controller, and a chaotic industry. She learned to command the screen with her eyes, because, for so long, she was not allowed to command it with her own voice. The life of Claudia Cardinale was a magnificent study in breathtaking contradictions. She was the vulnerable young victim who became an unbreakable survivor, the controlled studio product who transformed into a fiercely independent artist, the silent beauty who fought to find her powerful voice, the woman whose life began with a secret born of violence, who found her way to a life filled with a family, born of a love she chose for herself. Her journey was an epic poem of resilience. Her story compels us to look beyond the dazzling, immortal image on the screen and to appreciate the sheer, unyielding force of will it took to simply endure, let alone to thrive. She didn't just possess on-screen charisma. She possessed real-world armor. That famous, smoldering look in her eyes wasn't just a performance for the camera. It was the quiet, steady fire of a woman who had been through the crucible and had refused to be consumed by the flames. Claudia Cardinale's legacy is not just in the celluloid masterpieces she left behind for us to cherish. It is in the unwavering strength of her spirit. She was an alchemist who turned pain into power, a gilded cage into a launch pad for a flight to freedom, and proved, time and time again, that the most compelling, heroic, and inspiring role she ever played was simply and magnificently herself. May she rest in peace, a true legend whose stories encore will live forever. If this untold story of resilience and rebellion captivated you, hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell, because Hollywood's greatest stories are often the ones that happen between the cameras rolling. Give this video a thumbs up if you believe, like Claudia did, that no contract, no controller, and no cage can contain a truly free spirit. Share this with someone who needs to hear that even when your voice is silenced, your strength can still change the world. What other legendary stars do you think have untold stories of quiet rebellion? Drop your suggestions in the comments below, because your idea might just become our next deep dive into cinema's hidden history. Ciao for now.